Okay, I'm live. Okay, let's get the copy thing. Let's copy. Is it? Copy. Okay. Sorry, it's taking me just a second. Because I'm loading this onto Patreon as well. Okay. And edit this. Connection is unstable. Okay. First, I'm setting this up on Patreon, so you can imagine just how many minutes to read in a day. It's been so slow. And because it's so slow, the mistakes that I'm making, I have to go back and fix them, and it takes me like a second. So this is going to be public. And published now. So that people can actually see it, so they can actually come on. So that's when we're going to actually get started with the actual reading. And what we're going to be reading is we're going to be reading for this Mystery Monday and my throat was beginning to go out, so in order to spare you all from the scratchiness of what my voice was sounding like, I was stopping in the middle of how long the point where they were not Sherlock, Watson, Lord of Baskerville, to go after the convict that apparently their manservant and his wife have been helping because he is the younger brother of the manservant's wife. So, it ended up that he's not to bring Lord Baskerville onto the moor because last time that happened at night, someone died, meaning Lord by the Hound of the Baskerville, which is a legend that's going on here. But internet yelling at me. Partially, I think it's because I've been switching between, and it is finally loaded on Patreon. So, everyone on Patreon wants to take a look at the live video. Funded project. And I always appreciate people popping on that are connected to this. One of the projects I actually have going on Patreon explicitly is I have an Oracle deck that I'm actually in the process of making. And if you are in a specific tier of patronage, you would get a discount on when the actual deck becomes available, and you also get a little bit more inclusion into letting me know what you think of it while it's being made, and you'll get updates and things of that nature while it is being created, and that it will be available. And you can check out for as little as $1 a month, and I'll be very, 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 very happy because hosting a podcast and things of that nature are not free. They're cheap, but they're not free. So any patronage is always included. So it is now 8 o'clock exactly. So that is now streaming on Patreon. And I will close that one off because it's not using my camera. It just has a link on there to the live stream. So turn on the Facebook Live. Get that set up. And then I shall go over here to get my Kindle because that's where I read my books from. This is an old Kindle Fire that I have had for close to a decade now, actually. And it still works very, very well. Alright. And it just helps me keep track of all the books that I'm reading, both for this podcast as well as for my own pleasure. I'm reading about, 10 to 15 books at this point. So, thank you everybody for popping in and everybody on the Facebook feed. There doesn't seem to be anybody on at the moment. And for some reason, I have no idea why, they're not letting me invite people to the Facebook Live feed. For some reason, I have no idea why. But thank you all for popping in, and we'll be getting started. So, you want to go grab a drink or something? Get settled in. We will get started. And as I said, we're getting started with Mr. Baskerville, with Sir Henry, and Watson stepping out onto the moor to lay hand on the convict that they have just discovered that the manservant and his wife are helping because of them being related and them feeling pity for this poor man. Alright, so they're just stepping out onto the moor. In 5 minutes, we were outside the door, starting upon our expedition. We hurried through the dark shrubbery, amid the dull moaning of the autumn wind and the rustle of the falling leaves. The air was heavy in the night, with a smell of damp and decay. Now and again the moon peeped out for an instant, but clouds were driving over the face of the sky, and just as we came out on the moor, a thin rain began to fall. The light still burned steadily out front. "Are you armed?" I asked. "I have a hunting crop. We must close in on him rapidly, for he is said to be a desperate fellow. We shall take him by surprise and have him at our mercy before he can resist." "I say, Watson," said the baronet, "what would Holmes say to this? How about that hour of darkness in which the power of evil is exalted?" As if in answer to his words, there rose suddenly out of the vast gloom of the moor that strange cry which had already been heard upon the borders of the great Grimpen mire. It came with the wind through the silence of the night, a long, deep mutter, then a rising howl, and then a sad moan in which it died away. Again and again it sounded. The whole air throbbed with it, strident, wild, and menacing. The baronet caught my sleeve, and his face glimmered white through the darkness. "My God, what is that, Watson?" "I don't know. It's a sound they have on the moor. I heard it once before." It died away, and an absolute silence closed in upon us. We stood straining our ears, but nothing came. "Watson," said the baronet, "it was the cry of a hound." My blood ran cold in my veins, for there was a break in his voice which told of the sudden horror which had seized him. "What do you call this sound?" he asked. "What do they call this sound?" he asked. "Who?" "The folk on the countryside." "Oh, they are ignorant people. Why should you mind what they call it?" "Tell me, Watson, what do they say of it?" I hesitated, but could not escape the question. "They say it is the cry of the hound of the Baskervilles." He groaned, and was silent for a few moments. "A hound it was," he said at last, "but it seemed to come from miles away, over yonder, I think. It was hard to say whence it came. It rose and fell with the wind. Isn't that the direction of the great Grimpen Mire?" "Yes, it is." "Well, it was up there. Come now, Watson, didn't you think yourself that it was a cry of a hound? I am not a child. You need not fear to speak the truth." Stapleton was with me when I heard it last. He said it might be the calling of a strange bird. No, no, it was a hound. My God, can there be some truth in all the stories? Is it possible that I am really in danger from so dark a cause? You don't believe it, do you, Watson? No, no. And yet it was one thing to laugh about it in London, and it is another to stand out here in the darkness of the moor and to hear such a cry as that. And my uncle, there was a footprint of the hound beside him as he lay. It all fits together. I don't think that I am a coward, Watson, but that sound seemed to freeze my very blood. Feel my hand. It was as cold as a block of marble. You'll be all right tomorrow. I don't think I'll get that cry out of my head. What do you advise that we do now? Shall we turn back? No, by thunder. We have come out to get our man, and we will do it. We after the convict, and a hellhound as likely as not after us. Come on, we'll see it through if all the fiends of the pit were loose upon the moor. We stumbled slowly along in the darkness, with the black loom of the craggy hills around us, and the yellow speck of light burning so steadily in front. There is nothing so deceptive as the distance of a light upon a pitch-dark night, and sometimes the glimmer seemed to be far away upon the horizon, and sometimes it might have been within a few yards of us. But at last we could see it. We could see whence it came, and then we knew that we were indeed very close. A guttering candle was stuck in a crevice of the rocks, which flanked it on each side so as to keep the wind from it, and also to prevent it from being visible save in the direction of Baskerville Hall. A boulder of granite concealed our approach, and crouching behind it, we gazed over it at the signal light. It was strange to see the single candle burning there in the middle of the moor, with no sign of life near it. Just one straight yellow flame, and a gleam of the rock on each side of it. "What shall we do now?" whispered Sir Henry. "Wait here. He must be near his light. Let us see if we can get a glimpse of him." The words were hardly out of my mouth when we both saw him. Over the rocks, in the crevice of which the candle burned, there was thrust out an evil yellow face, a terrible animal face, all seamed and scored with vile passions, foul with mire, with a bristling beard, and hung with matted hair. It might well have belonged to one of the old savages who dwelt in the burrow on the hillsides. The light beneath him was reflected in his small, cunning eyes, which peered fiercely to right and left through the darkness, like a crafty and savage animal who has heard the steps of the hunters. Something had evidently aroused his suspicions. It may have been that Barrymore had some private signal which we had neglected to give, or the fellow may have had some other reason for thinking that all was not well. But I could read his fears upon his wicked face. Any instant he might dash out the light and vanish in the darkness. I sprang forward, therefore, and Sir Henry did the same. At the same moment, the convict screamed out a curse at us and hurled a rock which splintered up against the boulder which had sheltered us. I caught one glimpse of his short, squat, strongly built figure as he sprang to his feet and turned to run. At the same moment, by a lucky chance, the moon broke through the clouds. We rushed over the brow of the hill, and there was our man running with great speed down the other side, springing over the stones in his way with the activity of a mountain goat. A lucky long shot of my revolver might have crippled him, but I had brought it only to defend myself, if attacked, and not to shoot an unarmed man who was running away. We were both swift runners and in fairly good training, but we soon found that we had no chance of overtaking him. We saw him for a long time in the moonlight until he was only a small speck moving swiftly among the boulders upon the side of a distant hill. We ran and ran until we were completely blown, but the space between us grew ever wider. Finally we stopped and sat panting on the two rocks, while we watched him disappearing in the distance. And it was at this moment that there occurred a most strange and unexpected thing. We had risen from our rocks and were running to go home, having abandoned the hopeless chase. The moon was low upon the right, and the jagged pinnacle of a granite tor stood up against the lower curve of a silver disk. There, outlined as black as an ebony statue on that shining background, I saw the figure of a man upon the tor. Do not think that it was a delusion, Holmes. I assure you that I have never in my life seen anything more clearly. As far as I could judge, the figure was that of a tall, thin man. He stood with his legs a little separated, his arms folded, his head bowed, as if he were brooding over that enormous wilderness of peat and granite which lay before him. He might have been the very spirit of that terrible place. It was not the convict. This man was far from the place where the latter had disappeared. Besides, he was a much taller man. With a cry of surprise, I pointed him out to the baronet. But in the instant during which I had turned to grasp his arm, the man was gone. There was a sharp pinnacle of granite still cutting the lower edge of the moon, but its peak bore no trace of that silent and motionless figure. I wished to go in that direction to search the tor, but it was some distance away. The baronet's nerves were still quivering from that cry, which recalled the dark story of his family, and he was not in the mood for fresh adventures. He had not seen this lonely man upon the tor, and could not feel the thrill which his strange presence and his commanding attitude had given to me. "A warder, no doubt," said he. "The moor has been thick with them since this fellow escaped." Well, perhaps his explanation may be the right one, but I should like to have some further proof of it. Today we mean to communicate with the Princetown people, where they should look for their missing man. But it is hard lines that have not actually had the triumph of bringing him back as our own prisoner. Such are the adventures of last night, and you must acknowledge, my dear Holmes, that I have done you very well in the matter of a report. Much of what I feel, much of what I tell you is no doubt quite irrelevant, but still, I feel it is best that I should let you have all the facts, and leave you to select for yourself those which will be most service to you in helping you to your conclusions. We are certainly making some progress. So far as the Barrymores go, we have found the motive of their actions, and that cleared up the situation very much. But the moor with its mysteries and its strange inhabitants remains as inscrutable as ever. Perhaps in my next I may be able to throw some light upon this also. Best of all would it be if you could come down to us. In case you will hear from me again in the course of the next few days. Okay, that's the end of chapter 9 and his second report. And we have been going for about half an hour or so. Okay. Sorry. Let's take a look at how long the next chapter is. Okay. So this is chapter 10, an extract from the diary of Dr. Watson. And it's not a terribly long chapter. It's about 10 pages. So we'll see how long we get. We are going to be stopping at somewhere around the end, 8:40 is usually when I pop off because time issues. But there we go. Alright, so chapter 10, extract from the diary of Dr. Watson. So far, I have been able to quote from the reports which I have forwarded during these early days to Sherlock Holmes. Now, however, I have arrived at a point in my narrative where I am compelled to abandon this method and trust once more to my recollections, aided by the diary which I kept at the time. A few extracts from the latter will carry me on to those scenes which are indelibly fixed in every detail upon my memory. I proceed then from the morning which followed our abortive chase of the convict, and our other strange experiences upon the moor. October 16th. A dull and foggy day, with a drizzle of rain. The house is banked in with rolling clouds, which rise now and then to show the dreary curves of the moor, with thin silver veins upon the sides of the hills, and the distant boulders gleaming where the light strikes upon their wet faces. It is melancholy outside and in. The baronet is in a black reaction after the excitements of the night. I am conscious myself of a weight at my heart, and a feeling of impending danger, ever-present danger, which is the more terrible because I am unable to define it. And I have not cause for such a feeling. Consider the long sequence of incidents which have all pointed to some sinister influence which is at work around us. There is the death of the last occupant of the hall, fulfilling so exactly the conditions of the family legend, and there are the repeated reports from peasants of the appearance of a strange creature upon the moor. Twice I have with my own ears heard the sound which resembled the distant baying of the hound. It is incredible, impossible, that it should really be outside the ordinary laws of nature. A spectral hound which leaves material footmarks and fills the air with its howling is surely not to be thought of. Stapleton may fall in with such superstition, and Mortimer also. But if I have one quality upon earth, it is common sense, and nothing will persuade me to believe in such a thing. To do so would be to descend to the level of these poor peasants, who were not content with a mere fiend dog, but must needs describe him with hell-fire shooting from his mouth and eyes. Holmes would not listen to such fancies, and I am his agent. But facts are facts, and I have twice heard this crying upon the moor. Suppose there were really some huge hound loose upon it. That would go far to explain everything. But where could such a hound lie concealed? Where did it get its food, and where did it come from? How was it that no one saw it by day? It must be confessed that the natural explanation offers almost as many difficulties as the other. As always, apart from the hound, there is the fact of the human agency in London, the man in the cab, and the letter which warned Sir Henry against the moor. This at least was real, but it might have been the work of a protecting friend as easily as of an enemy. Where is that friend or enemy now? Has he remained in London, or has he followed us down here? Could he be the stranger whom I saw upon the tour? It is true that I have had only the one glance at him, and yet there are some things to which I am ready to swear. He is no one whom I have seen down here, and I have now met all the neighbors. The figure was far taller than that of Stapleton, far thinner than that of Frankland. Barrymore it might possibly have been, but we had left him behind us, and I am certain that he could not have followed us. A stranger, then, is still dogging us, just as a stranger dogged us in London. We have never shaken him off. If I could lay my hands upon that man, then at last we might find ourselves at the end of all our difficulties. To this one purpose I must now devote all my energies. My first impulse was to tell Sir Henry all my plans. My second and wisest one is to play my own game, and speak as little as possible to anyone. He is silent and distrait. His nerves have been strangely shaken by that sound upon the moor. I will say nothing to add to his anxieties, but I will take my own steps to attain my own end. We had a small scene this morning after breakfast. Barrymore asked leave to speak with Sir Henry, and they were closeted in his study some little time. Sitting in the billiard room, I more than once heard the sound of voices raised, and I had a pretty good idea what the point was which was under discussion. After a time, the baronet opened his door and called for me. Barrymore considers that he has a grievance, he said. He thinks that it was unfair on our part to hunt his brother-in-law down when he, of his own free will, had told us the secret. The butler was standing very pale, but very collected before us. I may have spoken too warmly, sir, said he, and if I have, I am sure that I beg your pardon. At the same time, I was very much surprised when I heard you two gentlemen come back this morning and learned that you had been chasing Selden. The poor fellow has enough to fight against without my putting more upon his track. If you had told us of your own free will, it would have been a different thing, said the baronet. You only told us, or rather your wife told us, when it was forced from you, and you could not help yourself. I didn't think you would have taken advantage of it, Sir Henry. Indeed, I didn't. The man is a public danger. There are lonely houses scattered over the moor, and he is a fellow who would stick at nothing. You only want to get a glimpse of his face to see that. Look at Mr. Stapleton's house, for example, with no one but himself to defend it. There's no safety for anyone until he is under lock and key. Words. He'll break into no house, sir. I give you my solemn word upon that. But he will never trouble anyone in this country again. I assure you, Sir Henry, that in a very few days the necessary arrangements will have been made, and he will be on his way to South America. For God's sake, sir, I beg of you not to let the police know that he is still on the moor. They have given up the chase there, and he can lie quiet until the ship is ready for him. You can't tell on him without getting my wife and me into trouble. I beg you, sir, to say nothing to the police. What do you say, Watson? I shrugged my shoulders. If he were safely out of the country, it would relieve the taxpayer of a burden. But how about the chance of his holding someone up before he goes? He would not do anything so mad, sir. We have provided him with all he can want. To commit a crime would be to show where he was hiding. That is true, said Sir Henry. Well, Barrymore, God bless you, sir, and thank you from my heart. It would have killed my poor wife had he been taken again. I guess we are aiding and abetting a felony, Watson. But after what we have heard, I don't feel as if I could give the man up. So there is an end of it. All right, Barrymore, you can go. With a few broken words of gratitude, the man turned, but he hesitated and came back. You have been so kind to us, sir, that I should like to do the best I can for you in return. I know something, Sir Henry, and perhaps I should have said it before, but it was long after the inquest that I found it out. I've never breathed a word about it yet to a mortal man. It's about poor Sir Charles's death. The baronet and I were both at our feet. Do you know how he died? No, sir, I don't know that. What? I know why he was at the gate at that hour. It was to meet a woman. To meet a woman? He? How do you know this, Barrymore? Well, Sir Henry, your uncle had a letter that morning. He had usually a great many letters, for he was a public man and well known for his kind heart, so that everyone who was in trouble was glad to turn to him. But that morning, as it chanced, there was only this one letter, so I took more notice of it. It was from Coombe Tracey, and it was addressed in a woman's hand. Well, sir, I thought no more of the matter, and never would have done had it not been for my wife. Only a few weeks ago she was cleaning out Sir Charles' study. It had never been touched since his death, and she found the ashes of a burned letter in the back of the grate. The greater part of it was charred to pieces, but one little slip, the end of a page, hung together, and the writing could still be read, though it was gray on a black background. It seemed to us to be a postscript at the end of the letter, and it said, "Please, please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter, and be at the gate by 10 o'clock." Beneath it were signed the initials L.L. Have you got that slipped? Have you got that slip? No, sir, it crumbled all to bits after we moved it. Had Sir Charles received any other letters in the same writing? Well, sir, I took no particular notice of his letters. I should not have noticed this one, only it happened to come alone. Have you no idea who L.L. is? No, sir, no more than you have. But I expect if we could lay our hands upon that lady, we should know more about Sir Charles's death. I cannot understand, Barrymore, how you come to conceal this important information. Well, sir, it was immediately after that our own trouble came to us. And then again, sir, we were both of us very fond of Sir Charles, as we well might be, considering all that he has done for us. To rake this up wouldn't help our poor master, and it's well to go carefully when there's a lady in the case, even the best of us. You thought it might injure his reputation? Well, sir, I thought no good would come of it. But now you have been kind to us, and I feel as if it would be treating you unfairly, not to tell you all that I know about the matter. Very good, Barrymore, you can go. When the butler had left us, Sir Henry turned to me. Well, Watson, what do you think of this new light? It seems to leave the darkness rather blacker than before. So I think. But if we can only trace L.L., it should clear up the whole business. We have gained that much. We know that there is someone who has the facts, if only we could find her. What do you think we should do? Let Holmes know all about it at once. It will give him a clue for which he has been seeking. I am much mistaken if it does not bring him down. I went at once to my room and drew up my report of the morning's conversation for Holmes. It was evident to me that he had been very busy of late, for the notes which I had from Baker Street were few and short, with no comments upon the information which I had supplied, and hardly any reference to missions. No doubt his blackmailing case is absorbing all his faculties, and yet this new factor must surely arrest his attention and renew his interest. I wish that he were here. October 17th. All day today the rain poured down, rustling on the ivy and dripping from the eaves. I thought of the convict again upon the bleak, cold, shelterless moor. Poor devil. Whatever his crimes, he has suffered something to atone for them. And then I thought of that other one, the face in the cab, the figure against the moon. Was he also out in that deluged, the unseen watcher, the man of darkness? In the evening I put on my waterproof and walked far upon the sodden moor, full of dark imaginings, the rain beating upon my face and the wind whistling about my ears. God help those who wander into the great mire now, for even the firm uplands are becoming a morass. I found the black tor upon which we had seen the solitary watcher, and from its craggy summit I looked out myself across the melancholy downs. Rain squalls drifted across their russet face, and the heavy slate-colored clouds hung low over the landscape, trailing in great wreaths down the sides of the fantastic hills. In the distant hollow on the left, half hidden by the mist, the two thin towers of Baskerville Hall rose above the trees. They were the only signs of human life which I could see, save only those prehistoric huts which lay thickly upon the slopes of the hills. Nowhere was there any trace of that lonely man whom I had seen on the same spot 2 nights before. As I walked back, I was overtaken by Dr. Mortimer, driving his dog-cart over a rough moorland track, which led from the outlying farmhouse of Falmar. He has been very attentive to us, and hardly a day has passed that he has not called at the Hall to see how we are getting on. He insisted upon my climbing into his dog-cart, and he gave me a lift homeward. I found him much troubled over the disappearance of his little spaniel. It had wandered on to the moor, and had never come back. I gave him such consolation as I might, but I thought of the pony on the Grimpen mire, and I do not fancy that he will see his little dog again. By the way, Mortimer, said I as we jolted along the rough road, I suppose there are few people living within driving distance of this whom you do not know. Hardly any, I think. Can you then tell me the name of any woman whose initials are L.L.? He thought for a few minutes. No, said he. There are a few gypsies and laboring folk for whom I cannot answer, but among the farmers or gentry there is no one whose initials are those. Wait a bit, though, he added after a pause. There is Laura Lyons. Her initials are L.L., but she lives in Combe Tracy. Who is she? She is Franklin's daughter. What? Old Franklin the Crank? Exactly. She married an artist named Lyons, who came sketching on the moor. He proved to be a blackguard and deserted her. The fault, from what I hear, may not have been entirely on one side. Her father refused to have anything to do with her because she had married without his consent, and perhaps for one or two other reasons as well. So between the old sinner and the young one, the girl has had a pretty bad time. How does she live? I fancy old Franklin allows her a pittance, but can it be more? For his own affairs have considerably involved. Whatever she may have deserved, one could not allow her to go hopelessly to bad. Her story got about, and several of the people here did something to enable her to earn an honest living. Stapleton did for one, and Sir Charles for another. I gave a trifle myself. It was to set her up in a typewriting business. He wanted to know the object of my inquiries, but I managed to satisfy his curiosity without telling him too much, for there is no reason why we should take anyone into our confidence. Tomorrow morning I shall find my way to Combe Tracy, and if I can see this Mrs. Laura Lyons, of equivocal reputation, a long step will have been made towards clearing one incident in this chain of mysteries. I am certainly developing the wisdom of the serpent, for when Mortimer pressed his questions to an inconvenient extent, I asked him casually to what type Franklin's skull belonged, and so heard nothing but chronology for the rest of our drive. I have not lived for years with Sherlock Holmes for nothing. I have only one other incident to record upon this tempestuous and melancholy day. This was my conversation with Barrymore just now, which gives me more strong card, which I can play in due time. Mortimer had stayed to dinner, and he and the baronet played écarté afterwards. The butler brought me my coffee into the library, and I took the chance to ask him a few questions. Well, said I, has this precious relation of yours departed, or is he still lurking out yonder? I don't know, sir. I hope to heaven that he is gone, for he has brought nothing but trouble here. I've not heard of him since I left out food for him last, and that was 3 days ago. Did you see him then? No, sir, but the food was gone when next I went that way. Then he was certainly there. So you would think, sir, unless it was another man who took it. I sat with my coffee cup halfway to my lips and stared at Barrymore. You know that there is another man, then? Yes, sir. There is another man upon the moor. Have you seen him? No, sir. How do you know of him, then? Or more. He's in hiding, too. But he's not a convict, as far as I can make out. I don't like it, Dr. Watson. I tell you straight, sir, that I don't like it. He spoke with a sudden passion of earnestness. Now listen to me, Barrymore. I have no interest in this matter but that of your master. I have come here with no object except to help him. Tell me, frankly, what it is that you don't like. Barrymore hesitated for a moment, as if he regretted his outburst or found it difficult to express his feelings in words. It's all these going-ons, sir, he cried out at last, waving his hand towards the rain-lashed window which faced the moor. There's foul play somewhere, and there's black villainy brewing, to that I'll swear. Very glad I should be, sir, to see Sir Henry on his way back to London again. But what is it that alarms you? Look at Sir Charles's death. That was bad enough, for all that the coroner said. Look at this stranger hiding out yonder and watching and waiting. What's he waiting for? What does it mean? It means no good to anyone of the name of Baskerville, and very glad I shall be to be quit of it all on the day that Sir Henry's new servants are ready to take over the hall. But about this stranger, said I, can you tell me anything about him? What did Selden say? Did he find out where he hid, or what he was doing? He saw him once or twice, but he is a deep one, and gives nothing away. At first he thought that he was the police, but soon he found that he had some lay of his own. A kind of gentleman he was, as far as the old houses on the hillside, the stone huts where the old folk used to live. But how about his food? Selden found out that he has got a lad who works for him and brings all he needs. I dare say he goes to Combe Tracy for what he wants. Very good, Barrymore. We may talk further of this some other time. When the butler had gone, I walked over to the black window, and I looked through the blurred pane at the driving clouds and at the tossing outline of the windswept trees. It is a wild night indoors, and what must it be in a stone hut upon the moor? What passion of hatred can it be which leads a man to lurk in such a place at such a time? And what deep and earnest purpose can he have which calls for such trial? There in that hut upon the moor seems to lie the very center of that problem which has vexed me so sorely. I swear that another day shall not have passed before I have done all that man can do to reach the heart of the mystery. And that is the end of chapter 11. Okay, went on a little bit longer than usual, but such is the way of things. All right, thank everyone for popping in. and I hope everyone has a good evening and good night. Tomorrow, Tuesday, is Twist Tuesday, and we will be continuing on with the next chapter of Persuasion tomorrow, same time, same place. And I hope everyone has a good night, and I hope to see everyone tomorrow. So have a good night. Thanks for stopping by.